The wind that morning carried the scent of dust and sun-baked grass, a restless hymn rolling over the plains. Elias Boone stood at the edge of the town's single road, boots planted in dry earth, hat tugged low against the glare. His eyes searched the horizon where the stagecoach would appear, and in his chest there was a tightness he had not known since he was a boy. A letter, folded and nearly worn through the creases, lay tucked into the pocket of his vest. He had read it countless times, each word building a fragile bridge out of his loneliness, a promise that soon he would not face the silence of his ranch alone. For years he had lived as a shadow among men, feeding cattle, mending fences, sleeping beneath a roof that held no warmth. His frame was lanky, his voice quiet, his company rarely sought. Folks in town did not much notice Elias except when they needed a day's labor cheap. They called him the hermit cowboy, said he was too strange, too plain, too poor to win a woman's hand. Their words carved deep, though he never answered back. It was easier to keep his distance, to let the years pass like empty wagons across the prairie. But the letter, her letter, had set something tender alight inside him, a fragile hope that maybe he had not been left behind entirely. He had polished his boots the night before until they shone, trimmed his beard close, even combed through the wild tangles of his hair. In his mind he pictured her as delicate, soft-spoken, a woman grateful for steady ground and a roof above her. Perhaps she would need him the way he longed to be needed. Perhaps she would look past the sharpness of his angles, the awkward way he stood in a crowd, and see something worth her time. That morning, with the dust rising and the stage running late, Elias let his mind drift to a picture of her smile. He had built her in imagination, piece by piece, until she seemed as real as the sun on his face. The first rattle of wheels carried over the plain. A murmur ran through the small knot of townsfolk who had gathered, hungry for spectacle. The stagecoach crested the rise, its horses foaming, its wheels leaving swirls of ochre behind. Elias' pulse kicked. He straightened, tugged once at his vest, forced himself to breathe slow. The coach drew up, dust clouding, and the door swung wide with a metallic groan. She stepped down onto the packed earth, taller, broader than any woman he had ever seen. Her shoulders square, her hands calloused though clean, her dress patched yet neatly pressed. Her presence seemed to halt the very air. The townsfolk fell silent, then erupted in low chuckles, the kind meant to wound. Well now, someone muttered. He ordered a bride and got himself a mountain. Another laughed sharp, cruel. Elias felt the blood rise to his cheeks, shame cutting through him like a blade. This was not the woman he had pictured in his lonely hours. She was more, too much, the crowd was already deciding. Clara Mae did not flinch. Her eyes scanned the faces, calm though her hands trembled faintly where they clutched her small trunk. She looked at him then, straight into his eyes, steady, waiting. Elias' throat tightened. He should move, step forward, claim her, silence the whispers. Yet his boots felt nailed to the earth. He hesitated, only a heartbeat, but long enough. The laughter swelled, spilling across the saloon porch, bouncing from wall to wall. A woman's voice hissed, "She'll crush him before the month is out." Another man spat into the dirt, grinning. Clara's voice, low and even, broke the noise. "Are you Elias Boone? The man who wrote me?" He forced a nod, his voice refusing him. That silence was worse than any denial. He reached at last for her trunk, lifting it from her grip. The crowd saw the pause, the way he faltered before taking it, and they laughed louder. Yet he held to it, jaw clenched, and together they walked away from the town center, his shadow beside hers long on the ground. He did not meet a single eye. The wagon ride out was steeped in silence. Only the creak of wood and the rhythmic snort of the horse filled the air between them. Elias' shame pressed on him heavy, his imagination of her cracking apart with every turn of the wheels. He had dreamt of a fragile thing in need of saving. Instead, here sat a woman whose strength unsettled him, whose presence drew out the town's cruelest laughter. He gripped the reins tighter, as though he might control the storm building inside him. Clara broke the silence, her voice quiet, carrying a tremor she tried to hide. "I've nowhere else to go. My family's gone. I came because there was no other place for me." She looked ahead, not at him. "If you'll let me, I'll work. I can cook. I can mend. I can pull my weight. I don't want charity, just a chance to belong. Elias turned, studying her in the fading light. He saw then not what the town mocked, but a woman who had crossed miles alone, carrying hope heavier than her trunk. The sting of his hesitation gnawed at him. She had deserved a steady hand, not his faltering one. Her face was not hard, as he had thought in those first moments, but softened by vulnerability, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion, yet holding a quiet flame. His chest tightened in a way he could not name. The reins slipped a little in his hands as he stared forward again, the land stretching wide and open. She shifted, folding her hands in her lap. Between them sat a silence no longer empty, but heavy with possibility. He cleared his throat once, as though to speak, but no words came. Instead, he simply drove the wagon onward, the wheels crunching over gravel, carrying them both into a future uncertain as the sky before a storm. Dusk spread fire across the plains, gold deepening into red, shadows stretching long. The Boone ranch waited in the distance, lonely, quiet, aching for life. Elias and Clara sat side by side, both wounded by laughter, both tethered now by fate's unyielding hand. The last light of the day painted them not as mismatched figures, but as two souls walking into the unknown, fragile in their silence yet bound together by something the crowd could not see. The Boone ranch greeted Clara with silence. The wind swept against the sagging fence posts, carrying the rustle of grass and the lowing of cattle. She stepped down from the wagon with care, her boots sinking into the dry earth. The house loomed before her, plain, weathered, stripped of charm. Yet she did not flinch. Where another woman might have mourned the emptiness, Clara saw a place hungry for hands, for care, for breath. Elias led the horse away without a word, his tall, lean frame a shadow against the fading light. In the first days, Clara moved like someone who had always belonged to work. She drew water from the well until her shoulders burned, patched the gaps in the chicken coop, and filled the house with the smell of biscuits and stew. Elias watched from a distance, his pride stinging sharper each time she outpaced him. He had imagined himself the provider, imagined gratitude in her eyes, not this quiet strength that seemed to make his efforts smaller. At supper, he chewed slow, tasting not only her cooking but the sting of inadequacy. Yet when she laid a biscuit at the side of his plate, her roughened hand brushing the wood of the table, a warmth settled beneath his ribs he could not ignore. Their silences began to change. Where once they pressed down heavy, they now stretched wide like a sky, room for words to come if they chose. Clara asked about the land, about the cattle, about the fences. Elias answered short, honest, never wasting a syllable. Still, she listened as if each word mattered. At night, he found himself awake longer than usual, the memory of her laughter carrying on the wind when the kettle had boiled over that afternoon. But town was not so kind. When Elias rode in for supplies with Clara at his side, whispers turned sharper. Children, cruel in their mimicry, walked stiff-legged behind them, laughing. A store clerk smirked as he weighed flour. Never thought Boone would marry his own ranch hand, he muttered. Elias froze, shame striking deep. He longed to vanish into the wood-paneled walls. Clara stood tall, her shoulders square, but her jaw was set hard enough to break. She said nothing, only carried the sack of flour herself, though the sting of the words hung between them all the way home. Elias felt the stone of his own cowardice grow heavier. Why had he not spoken? Nights passed, and still she gave herself to the land. One evening, Elias returned from the corral to find Clara sitting by the hearth, mending his torn shirt. The lamplight softened the planes of her face, and when her fingers brushed his wrist, a shock of warmth raced through him. He said nothing, but when he put the shirt on the next morning, the neat stitches felt like armor against the world. Another day, he taught her to ride his best horse. She clung to the reins with more determination than skill, laughing loud and unguarded when she nearly lost balance. That laugh struck Elias like sunlight, breaking through clouds he had carried for years. One dawn, Clara found him collapsed against the corral fence, exhausted from driving stray cattle through the night. He had not seen her approach, but he felt the weight of a blanket settle around his shoulders. She said nothing, only stood a while, watching the horizon pale into morning. In that silence, something shifted. Elias no longer saw her as the town had painted her. He saw the quiet strength in her hands, the patience in her eyes, the way she never turned cruel though cruelty had been her welcome. Slowly, painfully, he began to see her as his equal, and perhaps more. The storm came without warning. A sky that had been clear turned iron gray by afternoon, the wind tearing across the plains with a wild hunger. Elias rushed to secure the cattle, ropes burning his palms as he fought to close the gates. The thunder roared low, the earth shaking with the beat of hooves. A fence post splintered, cattle surging in a blind tide. Elias braced himself, rope straining, until his boots slipped in the mud. He went down hard, a shadow of hooves bearing down. Clara was there before thought. She charged into the storm, mud clinging to her dress, rain blinding her eyes. With a strength born of survival, she seized Elias by the shoulders and dragged him clear just as the cattle thundered past. He gasped, half-choked on rain, staring at her. This woman the town had mocked, this woman whose sighs had been their laughter, now the very reason he drew breath. They collapsed together in the mire, clinging as the storm tore around them, bodies pressed against the earth. Her arms held him firm, and in that desperate grasp, Elias understood. Her presence was not too much. It was exactly enough. When dawn broke, the ranch lay battered. Roof shingles scattered, fences torn, cattle scattered to the horizon. Elias' hand shook as he pulled himself up, every muscle aching. Clara moved quietly, brewing coffee over the embers of a fire, her back straight though her dress hung heavy with mud. She set the steaming mug into his hands, her eyes meeting his with a steadiness that anchored him more than the drink. He held her gaze, no words between them, but something new and unshakable pulsing there. In town, the laughter did not vanish. Whispers followed them still, smirks behind hands, sideways glances. But Elias no longer bowed his head. He walked beside Clara, his stride steady, his shoulders no longer curved inward. The same townsfolk who had laughed now found nothing to pierce in him, nothing to tear down. Clara's chin lifted, her steps certain. They had weathered a storm larger than gossip. And in the quiet that followed, a truth settled deep, that strength comes in many forms, that love often hides inside the very things the world mocks. Perhaps you, listening now, have felt the same, the sting of laughter at your back, the heaviness of shame carried like a stone in your chest. But remember this, dignity is not granted by those who sneer. It is claimed, side by side with someone who sees you clear. Sometimes the one who saves you is not the one you dreamed of, but the one you nearly overlooked. And in that, there is grace.